Hey everybody. So this is to walk you guys through your second essay. Um, and this one, of course, we went into kind of the modernist era. We looked at different texts across kind of World War I and World War II, and different sort of movements like the Harlem Renaissance. So we took a big step forward in terms of kind of the historical situation and what was happening in the world. And obviously, there's a great deal related to the economic, social, and political impacts of World War I and World War II. So there's a lot of different connections you can make between these different authors and their identities. So the prompt here is pretty simple. You're going to choose two works that you read from this unit from two different authors, and you're going to compare and contrast them in terms of literary analysis. So you can choose works that seem to kind of naturally fit together. So you could choose, say, I don't know, Fitzgerald and Hemingway, who in their post-war expat lifestyles. Or you could choose kind of two unexpected authors that don't seem to naturally fit together, say Frost and Langston Hughes. Either or is fine. It's totally up to you. It's just kind of dependent upon what you want to say about both of those texts and those authors. So you're going to want to show how they're similar and different in terms of literary style or different elements. Most importantly, secondarily, you might think about the historical context or the situation and the biographical context. So you should use the graphic organizer that you completed to help you kind of organize your thoughts about how you might compare two different texts and authors. So you do have to have at least two sources to support your analysis in this essay. They do need to be credible. Things like gradesaver.com and 123helpme.com are not credible sources, but things like something from .edu or something of that nature, or say PBS or history.com, biography.com, those are all credible sources you can absolutely use. And basically what you want to do is similar to how you incorporate evidence from your texts into your analysis. You should incorporate quotes from those sources, which help support your analysis. So, for example, if you're going to talk about, say, Scott Fitzgerald and say Hemingway together, you might cite a small quote from history.com about kind of the historical situation for expats in America, or expats in Europe post World War I or II, or it's kind of the Roaring Twenties or whatever it might be. Your essay does need to be 2 to 3 pages in length and is due by Sunday, September 9th at 11:59 p.m. This is a little bit shorter just because we do only have 2 weeks in this unit. So I know I'm kind of making it a bit jam-packed, but I want you guys to write enough that it feels like you're comprehensively analyzing both poems. So try not to shortchange one poem or the other. You want to kind of give them equal weight and value and treatment in your analysis. So I said at minimum 2 pages, but likely you would extend this a little bit further into the 3rd page to kind of get a really good set of analysis around both poems. Like I said, you're always welcome to write more. You just can't write less. If you write less, then to the bottom of the 2nd page, then you will have points taken off. Remember that everything's checked for plagiarism, requires MLA formatting, and don't forget about the 2 sources that are required. So your choices are Frost, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, McKay, and Hughes. The topic that you want to compare them across and the choices of literary works is up to you, so choose carefully. Make a strategic choice. Make a choice that makes sense to you, whether that's unexpected or expected pairings. Make sure you discuss and analyze both works in depth using your sort of knowledge of the historical situation as well as how to analyze different works like poetry or different genres like poetry or prose to analyze both works. And like I said, you want to pull in specific concrete evidence from both texts to help support your claims. Now, this is really, really important. One thing that you don't want to do when comparing and contrasting 2 different works is to separate them out by paragraphs. So you don't want to have, say, 1 paragraph for Frost and 1 paragraph for Hughes, 1 paragraph for Frost, 1 paragraph for Hughes. That's not a complex form of analysis. To elevate that further, what you want to do is compare them across ideas within the same paragraph. So, for example, if you wanted to think about things like the themes of the different works and how they compare or contrast, how they're similar or different. Say I wanted to do Frost and Langston Hughes. I might talk about the idea of isolation that Frost in certain poem talks about isolation and Langston Hughes talk about isolation. Now, they might be talking about it in different ways, but they both have a thematic concept of isolation. So that might be my first paragraph, is to say there's a theme of isolation in Frost's poem and in Hughes's poem. And I would talk more about both poems and how they're showing the idea of isolation and maybe how they're showing it differently. For Frost, that might be isolation in nature, away from developed world. And for Hughes, it might be isolation of identity as a Black man in this sort of emerging era in the 20s and 30s. Then my second paragraph might be something more like symbolism. Say I wanted to talk about a specific symbol in both poems, and I would say both Frost and Langston Hughes use a certain type of symbol to represent this idea. And then I might compare them, contrast them, and then the third paragraph I might say something like both Frost and Langston Hughes had a specific background that contributed to their work in this way. But what I'm doing is comparing and contrasting them across ideas rather than giving them each a separate paragraph. So some things you can think about, like I said, you can think about themes or major literary elements, like similes, metaphors, conflict, personification, characterization, that kind of thing. You can think about structures and how they're similar or different, and how does that change meaning. So, for example, if you're doing a poem by Langston Hughes versus prose by Fitzgerald, how does the structure of poetry versus prose change the meaning? How does it help us understand the poems differently or similarly? And what are the historical or biographical elements that you could use to kind of contextualize both works? So in every one of these works, the author's identity is very integral to the text itself. So someone like Hemingway, dealing with post-war trauma, dealing with the expat life in Europe, in Hills Like White Elephants, is a very specific and unique experience that he's parlayed into that text. Same thing with Fitzgerald or McKay or Hughes. So think about how that identity or that historical situation influences the meaning of that work. And then what are the differences or similarities between those authors or those historical situations relative to social, political, or economic issues that were happening at the time, and how does that kind of influence the meaning of both works? So for Hemingway, he was a very liberated young man. He wanted to talk about specific issues which were not allowed in polite society, and how does that influence, say, the meaning of Hills Like White Elephants? Most important thing, of course, don't let this become a history essay, don't let this become a biography essay. This is a literary analysis essay, so the primary focus should always be on analyzing both poems, the texts, through a literary element or lens, like a simile, metaphor, whatever it might be. Your secondary elements should be the historical or biographical context, but that should not be the primary focus. And you want to make sure that you're incorporating lots of good quotes from both poems to help support and showcase, certain ideas. You're going to be assessed in making sure you have a fully developed essay structure with a good argumentative thesis claim at the beginning. So something like that might be, say, both Fitzgerald and Hemingway discuss the expat isolation and trauma in a post-war Europe, and then include your main ideas as well. Good close analysis of both works and their major concepts, good evidence from both texts to support your claims, and that means both from your primary sources, the poems, and your secondary sources. Now, I want to make sure that, again, it's very clear. You should choose one poem from each author. So it should two poems max. Don't try to do more. Proper page length, MLA formatting, and number of source uses and citations. Because you're using outside sources, again, you should always cite in text and on a bibliography. So you should have a bib that includes at least 4 sources on it, the 2 outside sources and the 2 texts that you're analyzing. And whenever you're citing in text, you want to make sure you have good in-text citations. And like I said, a fully developed essay structure with an intro with a thesis claim, clear main ideas with lots of evidence to support, and a conclusion. And then good organization of your ideas across concepts rather than a section for each author. So as always, this is purposely broad because I want you guys to pair up the poems and authors that you want to match up. They should be something that you can create some really interesting similarities and differences in terms of comparison. and choose what is of most interest to you. There's a lot to unpack in all of these poems, so there's a lot of things you could talk about. I want you to keep it nice and concrete and narrow so that it's a good, solid argument structure. Let me know if you have any questions at all.